The moment I walked into that courtroom with the original will in my jacket pocket, half my family turned to stone. They thought I was too old, too forgetful, too broken since my wife passed. They were wrong, and now they were about to learn who I really was. The patriarch they tried to erase. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Samuel Whitaker. I'm 79 years old, a retired federal judge, a decorated veteran of the Korean War, and, at least until last winter, a man who believed that no matter how dark things got, family would always hold the line. I believed in honor, in legacy, in the idea that blood meant something. But I also believed once that love was unshakable, until the morning my wife Martha took her last breath and left me in a house that suddenly felt too large for one man to survive in. We were married 61 years. 61. We raised 3 children, buried 2 dogs, built a life out of the nothing we started with. She was the first girl I kissed, the only woman I ever loved. When I came back from the war, it was her hands that smoothed out the nightmares. When I came home from the courthouse, bone-weary and hollowed out by the weight of sentencing a man to life, it was her voice that made it bearable again. But no one prepares you for the silence that follows a loss like that. Not even someone like me, a man who sentenced people to death, who watched emotionless lawyers tear families apart in divorce court, who heard confession after confession from murderers who didn't blink. Nothing in my 43 years of jurisprudence could prepare me for the echo of her absence. After Martha died last December, I didn't just grieve, I vanished. The first morning after the funeral, I walked into the kitchen and pulled out 2 coffee mugs. Muscle memory. One for her, one for me. Hers had a faded "World's Best Grandma" scrawled in blue paint from one of our grandkids. I held it in my hands for a full minute before I realized what I was doing. Then I dropped it, shattered on the tile. That was the first sound the house made in 2 days. Meals went uneaten. I'd cook sometimes, eggs, toast, soup, only to stare at the plate like it belonged to someone else. I slept in my recliner more often than the bed. Couldn't bring myself to lie on her side, or mine. Sometimes I found myself standing in the doorway of our bedroom, just staring at her bathrobe still hanging on the hook. It still smelled like her lavender perfume. I went days without speaking to anyone. No need. The phone only rang when it was a telemarketer or a reminder from the pharmacy. Even then, I sometimes picked it up just to hear another human voice. Even if it was a recording, I started reading the same newspaper twice in one morning, started checking the locks 3, 4, 5 times at night. The days stretched like old rope, frayed at the edges, hard to hold on to. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. The man I saw there wasn't Judge Whitaker. He was smaller, tired. The lines in his face had turned from creases into canyons. Then, slowly, the phone calls came. At first, they felt like lifelines. "Dad, how are you holding up?" Thomas would say, his voice always clipped, like he had a meeting in 5 minutes. "Dad, maybe you should think about downsizing," Elaine suggested 2 weeks in, during a call that started with condolences and ended with market value assessments. "Dad, let's get lunch next week," Michael added one afternoon, though he never once followed through. I tried to be grateful, tried to remind myself that at least they were calling, but each conversation was coated with a certain tension, a waiting, like they were fishing for something, not quite ready to reel it in, like they were hovering over a chessboard, unsure whether to sacrifice the knight or castle early. It was in the pauses, those uncomfortable silences that followed every polite inquiry, moments where the phone line hummed with hesitation, as if they were reading from a script and the next page hadn't loaded yet. They'd ask about the estate, gently at first. "Dad, have you thought about what you want to do with the house? Have you looked into trust accounts? Do you have anyone helping manage the finances now that Mom's gone? Always so casual, so light, as if we were talking about weather or football. But I wasn't born yesterday. I had sentenced liars. I had watched body language shift when guilt walked into the room. And I knew deep in my gut that my children, the ones Martha and I had raised with every ounce of love we had, weren't just checking on their father. They were circling, waiting for something to weaken. And the tragedy is, I was already weakening. I just didn't know how far they were willing to go. Not yet. But I was about to find out. It was a Tuesday afternoon when they came. No warning, no phone call, no, "Can we stop by?" Just the sound of tires crunching across the gravel, and then the doorbell. Shrill, urgent, as if they thought I might not answer if they gave me time to think. I looked through the peephole and saw all three of them on my porch. Thomas in his navy blue coat, the expensive one he wears when he wants to be taken seriously. Elaine holding a reusable shopping bag like she'd brought me something homemade, though I could already tell from the way it sagged that it was just papers. And Michael, standing behind them both, hands in his pockets, shifting from foot to foot like a man who regrets being part of something but not enough to stop it. I opened the door. "Dad?" Elaine said with a smile so tight it looked painful. "We thought we'd surprise you." "You did," I said flatly, stepping aside. They filed in, looking around the house like it belonged to someone else. Or maybe like it already belonged to them. I caught Thomas eyeing the grandfather clock in the foyer. He used to play with the brass weights when he was a boy. Now his expression said appraisal. We settled in the living room, though I stayed standing. Thomas spoke first. He always does. "Dad, we've been talking." That phrase. Every disaster in my life has started with someone saying they've been talking. "You're alone in a house with 5 bedrooms, he continued. "The upkeep, the security, the taxes. We just think it might be time to simplify things." "And by we," I said, "you mean all of you." Elaine jumped in. "You know we care. This is about what's best for you." "Of course," Thomas said. "And we've done a little research." Elaine reached into the shopping bag and pulled out a leather-bound folder. It was thick, too thick for anything innocent. "This," she said, sliding it across the coffee table like it was a gift, "is a simplified living trust. We've had some help putting it together. It protects your assets, reduces tax exposure, and more importantly, ensures everything is organized should anything happen." "Did something happen already?" I asked quietly. Elaine blinked. "What do you mean?" "You said should anything happen. I'm just wondering if you know something I don't." Michael chuckled nervously. "Come on, Dad, you know what she means. It's just responsible planning." Thomas leaned forward. "You're not in court anymore, Dad. You don't have to cross-examine us." I didn't answer him. I was staring at the folder, at the weight of it, the way it had obviously been printed, reviewed, and bound with care. Planned. This wasn't a spontaneous visit. This was a boardroom presentation. Elaine nudged the folder closer. "We've already included everything from the current will, just reorganized, condensed, streamlined." I opened it, slowly, methodically. My hands didn't tremble this time. Page 1, my name. Page 2, list of assets. Page 3, executor changes. I scanned it the way I used to read legal briefs. Not for what was there, but for what wasn't. Gone was the clause about the endowment to the law school. Gone was the donation to Martha's church. Gone were the individual bequests to my grandchildren, the ones who actually called to check on me without an agenda. In their place, a trust split 3 ways. Thomas, Elaine, Michael. No conditions, no timelines, no accountability. Just the assumption that when I died, they'd take over the world I built. "You've already had this notarized," I said, flipping to the back. "Just to speed things up," Thomas said quickly. All it needs is your signature." I looked at them one by one. Thomas, calculating, confident, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees like he was closing a deal. Elaine, rehearsed, overly polite, already moving to pour tea she hadn't offered to make. Michael, trying to smile, trying not to be seen, and failing at both. I closed the folder. "I appreciate the effort," I said. "But this isn't necessary." Thomas's smile flickered. "Dad?" I said no. Elaine tilted her head. "We just want what's best for you." "No," I repeated more firmly. "What you want is to control what happens after I'm gone. But I'm not gone, and I'm not senile." Michael cleared his throat. "That's not fair." I looked at him. "Michael, you once asked me to bail you out of a bar fight in Nevada. I flew down that night. No questions asked. Don't talk to me about fair." The room went silent. "I buried your mother 8 weeks ago," I continued. "I'm not done grieving. I'm not done thinking. And I'm sure as hell not done running my own affairs." Thomas stood. "We'll give you time, but don't let pride get in the way of practicality." I turned my eyes on him. The same eyes that once stared down defense attorneys trying to spin the truth into smoke. "Pride built this house. Pride kept this family together when your mother had cancer, and none of you could handle it. Pride gave you all the lives you live now. You don't get to weaponize that word against me." He looked away first. They left shortly after. No hugs, no promises to call soon. The folder stayed behind. I burned it that night, in the fireplace Martha and I built with our own hands. The flames caught quickly, like the truth. And while the embers cracked and spit into the chimney, I sat in my armchair, hands folded, and finally admitted something I hadn't said aloud since the funeral. They're going to try something else. I was right, and next time, they wouldn't ask for my signature. They'd forge it. It happened 2 weeks later. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, and staring out at the garden Martha used to tend. The roses were wilting. The rosemary had gone wild. She would have scolded me gently for letting it grow so unevenly, then pulled on her old straw hat and marched outside to fix it herself. The ache that lived behind my ribs stirred again, dull but steady. The kind of pain that no doctor could treat, because it wasn't in the body. It was in the space she left behind. That morning, the mail arrived late. A heavy packet from a law office in the city I didn't recognize. It had no note, no greeting, just a subject line. "Confirmation of execution. Estate transition initiated." I opened it slowly. Like peeling a scab you know still isn't ready. Inside were copies of documents I hadn't seen before. Financial disclosures, property transfers, even a title change on the lake house where Martha and I had spent every anniversary since 1961. All of it signed, all of it dated, all of it bearing my name. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I double-checked the dates. February 3rd, my birthday. The same day I had spent alone, watching dust dance in the morning light across Martha's untouched reading chair. The day I never left the house. But the signature at the bottom of every page was mine. Or so it claimed. I stared at it for a long time. That thin, slanted loop of an S, the deliberate angle of the W. From a distance it might have fooled a stranger. Might have even fooled a jury. But not me. I'd signed my name to over 1,000 legal decisions in my career. I knew every nuance of my pen, every hesitation, every tremor. This wasn't hesitation. This was imitation. I sat there, in the kitchen we remodeled together in the summer of '92, and felt something I hadn't let myself feel since the funeral. Betrayal so sharp, it nearly doubled me over. It wasn't just that they'd lied. It was that they believed I wouldn't notice. that I'd lost enough pieces of myself that I wouldn't recognize the last one being stolen. I stood up too fast. My knees cracked, my hip flared with pain, but I didn't care. I went to the file cabinet in the study, pulled out the original will, the bank receipts, the notarized copies, each one intact, each one untouched, each one telling a different story than the one I'd just received. And that's when the weight behind all their silences came rushing back. The long pauses on the phone, the folder they left behind, the over-rehearsed concern in Elaine's voice, the way Michael kept looking anywhere but at me. I hadn't imagined it. I'd just hoped I had. I sank into Martha's old reading chair and closed my eyes. Her scent was faint now, lemon balm and lavender, almost gone. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Not to them, to her, because she had always seen it sooner than I did. She had always warned me, quietly, with that sad smile of hers, that our children loved comfort more than character, that they were growing into people we no longer recognized. But I had defended them. "They'll come around," I used to say. They had come around all right, with documents, forged signatures, and a plan to carve up the last thing I had left. I sat there for over an hour, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Not from fear, from something else. Something beginning to wake up. The same thing I used to feel in the courtroom when a liar thought they'd gotten away with it. When the truth hovered just out of reach, until the moment I grabbed it by the throat. That part of me wasn't gone. It had just been buried beneath grief. And now, it was stretching its limbs. I stood up slowly, set the papers aside, and walked into the hallway. There, hanging on the wall beside the coat closet, was a photograph taken 20 years ago. All of us, Martha and me, surrounded by our children, our grandchildren, smiling, whole, safe. That photo lied now, but I didn't take it down. Instead, I turned and picked up the phone. "Hello," I said when my lawyer answered. "I need you to come by the house. Bring everything." "Everything?" "Yes," I said. "And send a courier to the courthouse. I want to file a fraud claim." There was a pause. "What happened, Sam?" I looked out at the garden again. The light was fading. The shadows were long, but something had sharpened inside me. "They forged my signature," I said, "and they think I'll let them get away with it." It took me 3 days to get the meeting arranged. Not because they were busy, though they pretended they were, but because none of them wanted to be in the same room with me. Guilt does that. It makes people allergic to eye contact, but I insisted. "I'm not dying," I told Thomas over the phone. "No, I haven't fallen. And no, this isn't about my medication. I want to have dinner. At my house. All of you." Silence on his end. Then, "Sure, Dad. Of course." I knew they'd come. Not out of love, but curiosity, fear, maybe even calculation. The dining room hadn't been used since Martha's memorial. I took out the good dishes, the ones with the gold trim she loved, and cooked her roast chicken recipe myself. Took all day. My knees protested the whole time, but I didn't care. If I was going to confront my children, I'd do it with a full plate in front of them, like family. They arrived just after sunset. Thomas and his wife first, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like they were expecting a trap. Elaine came alone, hair perfect, nails perfect, face unreadable. Michael showed up last, 5 minutes late, wearing a denim jacket he'd owned since the 90s, and an expression that said he regretted everything but still couldn't stop himself. We sat, ate, or rather, they pushed food around on their plates while I watched them. No one asked about the recipe. No one asked how I'd been sleeping. They knew why they were here. They just hoped I'd take longer to say it. I didn't. Halfway through the meal, I set my fork down and folded my hands on the table. "Tell me something," I said quietly. "Do any of you believe I'm a stupid man?" They froze. Thomas was the first to recover. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I reached to my left, opened the drawer built into the buffet, and took out the folder. Not the one they gave me, but the one they didn't know I had. I dropped it gently onto the tablecloth. They didn't move, but their eyes tracked it like prey. 3 forged documents, I said. 2 fraudulent asset transfers, 1 modified will, all with my signature, none of which I signed. Elaine's face drained of color. Thomas looked at Michael, who looked at the wall. "I'm giving you one chance," I continued. "Right here, right now, to tell me the truth." "Dad, that's not—" Thomas started, but I raised one hand. "I wasn't asking for a story. I'm asking for the truth. Did you do it?" He hesitated. Then, "It was to protect you." Elaine's fork clattered onto her plate. Michael spoke for the first time. "I didn't know about the will. I swear, Dad. I thought it was just a financial consolidation. I didn't know they were copying your signature." Elaine turned on him. "Oh, come on. You were in the meeting, Michael. You told me it was just a placeholder. I didn't sign anything. I'm not the one who said Dad's mind was going." "Enough," I said, louder than I intended. The room snapped back into silence. I looked at them, really looked at them. Thomas, always needing control. Elaine, who saw sentiment as a weakness. Michael, adrift, too cowardly to say no, but too ashamed to admit he never said yes. I had loved all 3, provided for all 3, paid for educations, down payments, bailouts, quiet favors they assumed I'd forgotten. And this was how they repaid me, by stealing while the body was— "I buried your mother with a promise," I said softly. "To protect what we built, to protect this family. And I will," I added, "even if it means protecting it from you." Thomas stiffened. "Dad, let's not be dramatic." "Dramatic," I repeated, almost laughing. "You faked legal documents in my name. You tried to cut your own children out of my will, and you want to lecture me about dramatics?" "I was going to fix it," he muttered. "No," I said, voice like iron. "You were going to get away with it." I stood up. They followed suit, not out of respect, but instinct. "I've already met with my lawyer," I said. "The original will is secure. The court case is in motion. I'm pressing charges, but I have the authority to drop them." A beat of hope flickered across Elaine's face. "And I will," I added, "on one condition." They leaned in. "You will each send a written confession to my attorney by the end of the week. You will forfeit any claim to this estate. You will publicly acknowledge what you did, not to the press, but to your children, my grandchildren." "And if we don't?" Thomas asked coldly. I picked up the forged will and dropped it into the fireplace behind me. The flames leapt instantly, curling the edges black, devouring the lie whole. "If you don't," I said, "you can explain it from a witness stand, to a judge who used to clerk under me." Elaine stepped back. Michael sat down, burying his face in his hands. Thomas, proud, stubborn, cornered, said nothing. "I loved you," I said, voice cracking. "God help me, I still do. But love without trust is memory, and I have enough memories." I left them standing there and walked out onto the porch, the autumn wind tugging at the corners of my sweater. Behind me, through the window, I could see their silhouettes, frozen in place, silent. For the first time since Martha died, the house felt warm again. Not because it was full, but because the rot was finally out in the open, and now I could begin to heal. The courtroom smelled like old wood and dusted leather, the kind of room where verdicts shape legacies and silence speaks louder than argument. I stood just outside the double doors for a long moment, hands folded on the curved handle of my cane. Not because I needed the rest, not anymore, but because I wanted them to see me enter with purpose. When the clerk opened the doors, every head turned. I didn't shuffle in like an old man. I walked with deliberate steps, the same gait I used back when I presided over this very court in the late 80s. The same pace that once silenced a gallery full of attorneys. The room was full, too full. Not just family, but spectators, curious colleagues, and reporters who had sniffed out something juicy. The courtroom feeds on betrayal. And what better drama than a former judge testifying against his own children? Thomas, Elaine, and Michael sat at the defense table, flanked by their lawyers. Their suits were expensive. Their eyes were sunken. They looked like strangers to me now. The judge called the session to order. A younger man, mid-40s, clean-shaven, robe just slightly too crisp. I remembered swearing him in a decade ago when he was still green. Now he was the one holding the gavel, but as he nodded toward me, I saw something in his expression. Not pity, respect. The state's attorney spoke first, laying out the evidence. Forged signatures on estate documents, falsified notary stamps, the coerced appointment of a new executor without proper consent. "Your Honor," he said, gesturing toward me, "Mr. Whitaker's cognitive and legal faculties are intact. His original will, notarized and dated, has been preserved. The fraud occurred without his knowledge or consent and was designed to benefit the defendants at the direct expense of other beneficiaries, including minor grandchildren." The judge looked to me. "Mr. Whitaker, would you care to address the court?" I rose slowly, not for show, but to command attention. Every neck craned toward me, every eye waited. I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. I took one step forward, placed both hands on the wooden railing before the bench, and spoke clearly, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with something deeper. Truth. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady and low. "For 43 years I stood on the other side of that bench. I listened to lies. I sorted through greed. I looked men and women in the eye while they swore oaths they intended to break. I have sentenced thieves, murderers, and con artists. But never," I paused, "did I think I would one day be asked to explain to a judge how my own children tried to steal my name." Gasps whispered through the gallery. "I raised them to believe in integrity. I raised them to remember where they came from. My wife and I worked decades to build something we could leave behind. Not just money, but honor." I turned my eyes to Thomas first, my eldest, the one who used to fall asleep on my chest when he was 5, gripping my collar like it anchored him. To Elaine, my daughter, who once stood in front of a bully and said, "My daddy says you don't win by being cruel." And to Michael, my youngest, who used to cry when I left for work, who once asked me if judges were like superheroes. I paused, let the weight settle. "You didn't just forge my name," I said, quieter now. "You tried to erase everything it stood for." Thomas wouldn't meet my eyes. Elaine looked like she wanted to cry, but didn't. Michael just stared at the floor. "But here's the thing about names," I continued. "They're not just ink. They're built, word by word, day by day. With every sacrifice, every lesson, every hard choice. You don't get to take a name like mine. You have to live it." I turned back to the judge. "I'm not asking for vengeance. I'm not even asking for punishment. That's your decision, Your Honor. What I am asking is that the rightful will be honored, that the rightful beneficiaries be protected, and that my name, my true signature, be restored to where it belongs." The courtroom fell utterly silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Even the defense attorneys had nothing to say. The judge adjusted his glasses. His voice was quiet. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Your words have weight." He turned his attention to the bench, fingers tapping softly on the gavel before he spoke again. It is the ruling of this court that the forged documents are invalid. The original will stand. All property and assets shall remain under Mr. Whitaker's control until the terms of that will are naturally executed. As for the defendants, he said, pausing to glance at my children, criminal charges will remain under review by the district attorney's office. For now, the civil court recognizes clear evidence of intent to defraud, and Mr. Whitaker has every legal right to remove them from the estate. He raised the gavel once. This court stands in recess. Bang. And just like that, the lie was dead. I turned slowly and walked out of the courtroom, back straight, head high. My cane tapped lightly across the marble floor. Reporters rushed to the doors, but none dared speak as I passed. Outside, the sun was sharp and clean against the cold. The courthouse steps stretched before me like a battlefield I had just walked off victorious. Not because I shouted louder, but because I stood my ground. And at the bottom of those steps, waiting like a promise, were 3 of my grandchildren. Not for money, not for inheritance, just for me. They didn't say a word. They hugged me. And in that moment, I knew Martha would have been proud. It was 2 weeks after the hearing when the knock came at my door. No appointments, no text messages. Just a quiet knock, 3 times. Not urgent, not hesitant. I opened it and found my children standing there. No lawyers, no spouses, no excuses. Thomas had shaved the gray from his beard. Elaine's makeup was minimal for the first time in years. Michael was holding a casserole dish with shaking hands, like a boy again. For a long moment, none of us said a word. Then Thomas stepped forward. Dad, we came to apologize. I said nothing. He took a breath. That same deep breath I used to watch him take when he was 6 and about to confess to breaking a window. I was wrong, he said. We were all wrong. We betrayed your trust. We acted like scavengers. And we forgot who raised us. Elaine's eyes were red. Her voice cracked. You were always strong, even when Mom died, and we treated your grief like a weakness. Michael lowered his head. I was a coward. I went along with them, and I knew better. I've been ashamed every day since. I still said nothing, because part of leadership, true leadership, is knowing when silence holds more weight than words. They stood there, looking older than I remembered, smaller somehow. Then Thomas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in velvet. He opened it slowly, and inside was the silver nameplate from my old courthouse desk. Judge Samuel Whitaker, 11th Circuit. We found this in a box, he said. We wanted you to have it on your mantle. I stepped aside and let them in. We didn't speak much that afternoon. We didn't have to. They helped me trim the hedges outside, the ones Martha loved. Michael repainted the back gate. Elaine cleared the kitchen without being asked. Thomas fixed the squeaky hinge on the porch swing. Later, when we sat together in the living room, no arguments, no strategies, just together, I saw something shift in their faces. A kind of reverence I hadn't seen in years. Not fear, not guilt, respect. The kind of respect you give a man after you've tried to break him and failed. At sunset, I stood up slowly and walked to the mantel. I placed the nameplate between Martha's photograph and the folded flag from my service. Then I turned to them. I'm not your estate, I said quietly. I'm not your retirement plan. I'm not a signature waiting for the ink to dry. I am your father. They nodded. And as long as I am breathing, I added, this family will have standards. No one argued. Michael stood first. We understand, Dad. Elaine rose next. We'll earn back your trust. And Thomas, the one who had orchestrated the whole thing, came last. He didn't say anything. He just walked over, bent slightly, and kissed my hand, the same way I had seen men do in courtrooms to legends. I didn't forgive them all at once. That's not how redemption works. But from that day forward, things changed. They began calling again. But now it wasn't about assets. It was about Emma's piano recital, about Michael's new job, about Elaine joining a local charity board, in my wife's name. At the next family gathering, they insisted I sit at the head of the table. Not because I was the oldest, but because I had earned that seat, again. And when my grandchildren passed the salt, they didn't just say Grandpa, they said it with pride, because you can forge a signature, you can steal a name, but you cannot fake legacy. And in the end, I didn't just win back what was mine. I reminded them who they came from, and made sure they'd never forget it again.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.